Well, good morning and welcome to this week's panel conversation. I'm really very excited that you're able to join us today. We've got an excellent panel, and I'm just really excited to be getting into the conversation. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President of National Engagement at Polco. We're going to be talking today about the challenges that community leaders have in engaging with their community, especially during this difficult time of COVID. We're particularly interested in learning the creative ways they're continuing to engage with their residents safely and effectively during this very challenging time. Our goal today is that you take away a new idea, maybe a fresh perspective or a new strategy, something that you can apply to take your community forward. Here's the format of today's discussion. To give you an idea of what to expect. We'll take a few moments for each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a little bit more about their background. I'll kick off the conversation asking questions that can draw out how the communities are dealing with their engagement challenges and getting their residents' input on important community issues, and just what is important for helping to maintain an overall sense of community. And then during the second half of the time, we'll open up the floor to give panelists an opportunity to ask each other questions on anything that caught their attention, and then take questions from the audience. If that sounds good, we will get going with the panel introductions. Our first panelist is Dylan Feik. Dylan's the city manager in Monrovia, California. There never seems to be a straightforward path to becoming a city manager, and it sounds like Dylan's interest in local government started with just the simple question about wondering where your drinking water comes from. He's never looked back and has served in local government for the past decade. In Monrovia, Dylan manages a 300-person organization in a beautiful and full-service community of just under 40,000 people in metropolitan Los Angeles. As a result of his career path, Dylan has had the opportunity to experience a variety of local governance and community engagement models, which has helped shape his perspective. Dylan, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Of course. I appreciate you having me here today. My parents were both, my father was an air traffic controller, mother was a homemaker, but we always had kids growing up in our home, which were foster kids. And so for me, I guess to my very core, public service was just at the core of everything we did, everything I did. And I always thought that a career in local government was the profession for me. So city management was the track, and I've been very fortunate to be the manager here in Monrovia. As mentioned, a full service city, about 40,000 people in Metro Los Angeles. We have we have the mountains right up against the north side of our city. Frequently, some of the common problems we have are bears running through town or mountain lions scaring off kids at the school district and getting into school property. So it's a very unique city in Metro Los Angeles, but I sure have a great time and couldn't think of a better career to have than being the Monrovia city manager.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'm very excited about our second panelist, Stephen OBrien, because he's bringing an international perspective regarding engagement. Stephen's been in his position in Guelph, Ontario, Canada for the past 6.5 years, where he serves as city clerk and general manager of the clerk's office. Guelph is about 45 minutes west of Toronto, for those of you that aren't familiar with where it's located. This is a very important role in the local operations because it includes a wide range of responsibilities, such as serving as the council secretariat, supporting legislative services, corporate customer service, access and privacy, corporate records and information. It's a very wide range of responsibilities, including all of the election administration. Stephen's resume is very impressive, and I was particularly impressed by his experience at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and simply his commitment and leadership with several professional associations. Stephen, just thanks for being here, and you mind sharing just a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Really appreciate being here. And maybe I'll pick off where Dylan left off. Actually, both my parents were local government or municipal administrators. My mom was a planner by trade, and my dad actually was a city manager, chief administrative officer for a few municipalities in Ontario, Canada, one being Ottawa, the nation's capital, and more recently in Mississauga, which is really just west of Toronto. Guelph, Ontario is about, as Matt said, 45 minutes west of Toronto. And small city by the sort of the Ontario municipal context, or maybe I'd say medium-sized city, 135,000 people, home to one of Canada's top comprehensive universities, being the University of Guelph. And yeah, we're sort of nestled in an area of the province that's surrounded by farmland and agricultural sector. But the city of Guelph itself is a very dense and urban center. And so my passion in supporting local government comes sort of through the osmosis at the dinner table I got from my parents when I was younger, and I haven't really looked back. I really see the value of what local governments do in providing services to the community, and we offer a wide range of services, whether it's solid waste services, water, wastewater services, those traditional services, as well as emergency services and recreation programming. So it's nice. What I like working local level and what I'm passionate about it is you get to see the fruits of your labor immediately in the community. A decision that city council will make one day literally has effects the next day for the community. And that's very different, certainly in the Canadian context with what our friends at the federal level or the provincial levels do. Their decisions are a little bit more removed from the day to day. And I would imagine the context is the same in the US. Federal and state decisions can be a little bit more removed than those decisions that are made at the local level. So that's what keeps me passionate and keeps me going.
That's great. Hey, thanks a lot. And our final panelist is Nina Barafaldi St. Germain. Bar Harbor has been a long time Polco customer, and Nina has been the champion of using Polco's engagement platform for helping to build resident engagement in Bar Harbor. Nina is the community's engagement coordinator, and her work is dedicated towards facilitating and raising awareness on ongoing and future municipal discussions. She's currently the president of the board of the Bar Harbor Chamber of Commerce. And one thing I really love, Nina, is the way that you introduced your family. Nina has 3 children, 1 husband, and 1 Jack Russell Terrier named Twinkle that has finally calmed down enough to learn some really cool tricks. So that was really cool. Nina, can you just share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt, for having me here today. I think what I love most about Bar Harbor is the fact that we go from a town of 5,000 people to then seeing 2 to 3 million people in the high season. And so we still we still maintain our small kind of rural feel and expand into a city all at the same time. And so with that comes a whole myriad of problems. And Maine is the DIY state where we do everything ourselves. And so when I first started with communications, there was nobody in municipal government doing communications. Everybody was kind of responsible. Every department head was supposed to put something out maybe once a week or maybe once a month. And so there was not any kind of organized communications or gathering of information. And so I started putting my feelers out and saying, hey, why don't we do it like this? Or, hey, why don't we do it like that? Actually, I said, hey, why don't you do it like this? And they said, we have a better idea, Nina. How about you do it for us? And so that's how I came into this position.
That's great. That's a great story too. Nina, you've been super, and just based on what we've observed of the work that you're doing in Bar Harbor, just congratulations on all that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, as we get into this conversation, it's just worthwhile reflecting on how much COVID has really impacted and disrupted any kind of normalcy in any of our communities. It's just a very unsettled environment. And it's more important than ever just to simply maintain a meaningful connection with all of your stakeholders, just to make sure you understand what their current needs are and their current priorities are as they're going through this public health emergency. And just as important, residents need to feel like they're being heard as well. It's got to be authentic, but it also has to be a very important part of creating a sense of community. The pandemic obviously presents a bunch of challenges to maintaining this sense of community. And so the opportunity today is really just to hear about the creative approaches that communities are taking to deal with COVID and maintaining engagement and that feeling of being part of a community and with the local government that serves them. So one way maybe to just start off on this conversation is taking a look at the problem. It probably doesn't come to anybody's surprise, but through our research, we've really learned that about 80% of US adults have never even been to a city council meeting. And if you think about it, it probably makes some sense. People's lives are very busy. Traditional public engagement ways that we operate are generally not very compatible with family lifestyles. And sometimes there are just some barriers and challenges that get in the way of having people or giving people the opportunity to participate. So even before COVID hit us all, engagement was a really big challenge. And now that we've got social distancing and remote operations, communities are struggling with just trying to figure out how engagement is going to happen. So as we get into these conversations, it really is just to get a better understanding of what communities are doing to help connect their residents with the activities that are so important for maintaining a high quality of life and creating and maintaining that overall sense of community. Essentially, it becomes, how do we become better listeners and engage the community in a more meaningful way? So today, we're going to be considering 3 questions. How's your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? How does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And what tools do you currently use to measure feedback from a resident's perspective during these challenging times? So Dylan, let's start with you and talk about how Monrovia's communication and engagement strategy has evolved in the community since the start of the pandemic.
In Monrovia, one of the first things we looked at was the real threat of COVID and what that would mean for our community. And so our city issued a local emergency declaration on March 13th, which was about 3 days before the state issued its local emergency. So we were very ambitious and very concerned about the threat it would pose, being a part of a large metro area where we're very dense urban environment, people living together. We have high populations of Asian Americans here in the area. And originally at the time, there was concern about the coronavirus coming from China, from passers through in Wuhan, for example. And we actually had noted residents who had traveled to Wuhan and were reporting symptoms early on. So it was very concerning for us what this could possibly mean. So taking it as seriously as we possibly could from day one, everything shifted. We began viewing the world through a lens of COVID is here and we have to be ready for it. So we shifted 26% of our workforce to remote access. The only employees remaining at the city sites were those in, I'll call them like patrol officers, public works, first responders, and also fire department personnel, which include our paramedics. Everybody else was working remotely from home. So it was a pretty big endeavor to do that. But I think it also presented us with opportunities to work a little bit creatively and differently than we ever had before. People could work at home and we could provide excellent programs as staff working at homes. So once staff had been basically set up, which was a pretty big undertaking, but fairly quick, we were able to start programming activities, efforts, and basic city services to a remote platform. Crime reporting was transitioned online. All of our library programs and services transitioned online. Parks and recreation, even events. A couple months into COVID, we had a massive community celebration, which was our citywide birthday celebration. Well, we did a virtual event. People sent in videos celebrating in their own way. We had hours worth of videos from residents who wanted to basically share in the birthday celebration of our city when we couldn't gather in person. I think for me, one of the important strategies we took early on was also communication was facilitated by internet connectivity. And there were times where I actually issued a stop work order to Edison Electric because they were going to do some planned outages and basically cancel people's power for periods of time. And we actually stopped work to ensure that people had internet connectivity through the pandemic. I got a nice 8-page letter from the legal counsel at Edison reminding me that I really shouldn't do that. But it was a necessity that our communication strategies all evolved and were centered on internet connectivity. So I think from the start of the pandemic until now, where we're at, we've basically learned how to live virtually and recognize the necessity of being able to connect to people virtually. Although never could we have imagined the importance of being able to connect with one another in person. Now, there's a lot of people that are hurting because we can't have that human to human interaction. We see calls for mental health services going up. We see people in need of mental health resources going up. We notice that our staff who are working are also serving as sometimes mediators, and really trying to help get people access to resources that they need. Where that engagement, it looks different, but I think it's we're ever more engaged now than we have been in the past.
Has your online transition of all as many programs as you put online, have those worked pretty well?
Absolutely. In fact, we've even seen program participation go up. For example, at the library, tutoring, we do reading to youth, we do adult learning, we do resume building, we do all kinds of programs. And we've been able to see that participation now is not limited to, okay, I have to go over to the library and physically participate in the class. I can actually do it virtually from the comfort of my own home. And in a trend where people are, as you say, 80% less likely, or 80% of Americans have not attended a public council meeting. People want to participate in government, but they don't want to come out to do it. They want to do it from the comfort and confines of their own home. So finding ways to reach them, to reach into their home, I think that's been our focus.
That's very cool. Stephen, how about you? What's been your experience? How has your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the start of the pandemic?
I don't think the experience north of the border, and certainly in Guelph, has altered that much than what Dylan explained. We knew pretty early on. So it's funny you mentioned March 13th. It was a Friday. I remember that. And City Hall in Guelph closed on the 16th. So, and I think I want to say on the 14th, the WHO declared a global pandemic or something around that time. So things changed very quickly, and we realized that we had to pivot and be pretty agile. And I think, that's the one thing that's been really critical as a skill set, is sort of that I'll use the term almost like sort of a digital skill set to be able to be agile and pivot and move quickly. Agility has been so important for us in how we deal with situations, and that comes from sort of the traditional term of agile, and when you think about project management, but it also just sort of more in the generic term of the ability for departments and city staff to pivot and move in a way that the citizens and the community demanded. I can give you an example. We had a pretty big project. I mean, my work revolves around, as you mentioned, Matt, in my intro, around legislative services. So one of the big projects that we'd come across is there was a need in a time for City Council in Guelph to look at their structure. We've got 12 members of council in 6 wards, or another term what we call districts, and they've been in place in that way for 3 decades now. And like any good organization, there's always a need and an emphasis to sort of take a step back, look, decide, and figure out whether our governance model is meeting the needs of the community. And so we had planned at the tail end of 2019 and leading into the early part of 2020, sort of December, January, February, to have a really significant, robust community conversation about that governance model. How many councillors do you want per ward? Is 12 enough? Do we need more? Do we need less? How is this governance structure suiting the needs of the community? We had planned 7 town hall sessions, one in each of the wards or each of the districts, and one sort of broader city town hall, and open houses and that kind of thing, to sort of engage with the community in what a year ago we would have thought was a very traditional way to engage with the community. And then the world got tipped upside down on March 13th of 2020. And so we had to move pretty quickly. We went completely digital online. We still managed to have an open virtual town hall. We had panelists that were on the call. We allowed for residents to call in and ask questions in that regard. We recorded it, much like this panel discussion is being recorded. We posted it online. We leveraged the tools of social media and various platforms, and we use sort of what we have an online engagement tool that we use that also was really robust. Allowed for surveying, allowed for questions to be asked, and we tried to narrow the gap between the experience of what an in-person engagement would feel like on this project to what now a digital engagement project would feel like. And in an in-person situation, any one of us could walk up to me and say, I have a question about this. You could do it at a coffee break. You could do it near the end of the ceremony or at the end of the event. You could put your hand up in the middle and ask the question. And so we're trying to find a way to do that. And it sounds almost simplistic or overly intuitive, but we had to deliberately think about how we could match that, because you can't have that when you fill out a survey online, and you can have it somewhat when there's a panel. But what we did is we found, well, we'll hold virtual office hours where we had set times, morning, afternoon, evening, on the weekends, where people could pick up a phone and dial in to us. And we staffed it. We had made sure that we had experts that were on the call and be able to answer phone calls. But that allowed us to really bridge the gap and bring close the idea of an in-person virtual versus a virtual engagement session. So, yeah, to answer the question simply, our strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic by really forcing us to be digital and think digital and be agile in that, and in a way that we still think really supports the community. And what we found is it worked very well. We had 3 weeks. We had over 600 surveys completed online. We had great organic reach through social media, not boosted or paid content, but organic reach through various social media platforms. And so we've seen it's been pretty successful. And I think Dylan makes a great point. People are busy taking their kids to soccer practice or swimming lessons. They're caring for maybe elderly parents. Life is busy. It demands a lot of us. And that hasn't changed necessarily through the pandemic. That existed before. And so in a way, these digital means of reaching out to people has maybe in a way made it more accessible to those that want to input on city decision making and local government processes. So I think it's been really successful.
Are your elected bodies still meeting remotely, or did you go to a remote version?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that sort of it structures in Ontario, in Canada, is that the provincial level, akin to the state level government, sets the rules for municipalities. We're in the term we use often is we're creatures of the province. Our framework for operating and our rules of engagement, so to speak, as municipalities is set by the province. They enacted changes to the legislation, the Municipal Act in Ontario, that allowed for municipalities to have virtual online meetings for the elected bodies. So we moved pretty quickly. I would say, I think we were one of the first. I'm going to say at least one of the first 2 or 3 in Ontario that went remote and virtual, and we've been that way ever since. The mayor as head of council is in the building. Our counterpart to Dylan is in the building as CAO, and myself as the city clerk, sort of the overseer of the legislative process and procedures, is in the building. Other than that, we can have everyone else remote, all of council, all of staff, and we've supported that. They're live, they're streamed. We still accept what we call delegates, so members of the community coming in to speak to their elected members about a specific issue. So it's been very successful.
That's great to hear. Let's shift over to you, Nina. How's your experience been in Bar Harbor? How has your communication and engagement strategy evolved over the course of the year?
Well, I think like what Dylan and Stephen have been talking about is we have pivoted very quickly also. I guess we were all primed for it. We were all ready to go. We just didn't know how ready we were, which is kind of amazing, because why wouldn't we have done this earlier? Because in some regard, it has been so incredibly successful. And staff has been able to be very productive while at home, so there are just many things like that that have been fantastic. We found early on some of our difficulties came in so many different sources of information. People were getting really confused. They didn't know who was responsible for what information. Am I getting this hospital information from the hospital? Am I getting it from the CDC? So people were getting very agitated, asking lots of questions, and really wanting municipal government to step in and kind of help out. And then we did. We started doing formalized updates three times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we became amalgamators of generalized information, which I feel like was huge in terms of creating a little more ease within the community. So, and then at the same time, there was what we call the Down East COVID Task Force, which we are really lucky that we have a genetics lab here, and we also have relations to Wuhan in China because of our genetics laboratory. And then we also have our national park, so we have federal employees, and then so we have this vast number of different circles that work all here in Bar Harbor. So we have cruise ships that were supposedly going to be coming in, and then what's going to happen with the cruise ships? They're all going to bring COVID and disseminate it on our little town, and we'll all die. And so what we had to do was we had to just kind of begin to chunk things and make them consumable. And so then town council met and they made some decisions around, they prevented the cruise ships from coming. That was before the CDC did that. They said, okay, stop, we can't have them here because there's no way our hospital can handle this. So then we began to have some forums where we had what I call heads of state. So we had our people from the national park, we had people from town government, from the library, from the school, and we collected everybody in one place so that then in a Zoom format, a Zoom webinar format, so that people could get their questions answered all in one place. And I think that helped a lot. We had a huge turnout for that, greater than any forum I've run in person. We typically have 3 or 4 forums a year to talk about big issues. And I think this one of our latest was probably double in the Zoom webinar format. So that felt really successful. I'm trying to think, in addition to all this, we can't discount what happened with the Black Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter movement, and how that created a whole nother level of conversation that needed to happen at the same time that we were dealing with COVID. At the same time, we were trying to figure out how do we have our town meeting, because then we were having some marches in the streets, we were having collections of people. How do we handle this? What do our police do? And so there was a lot of interdepartmental communication having to happen, and then also communicating back to the state, what's happening with our COVID violations, if we allow people to group up, is our municipality going to get in trouble? How do we do this safely? And so I think what happened was, I guess I always try to imagine it like the wheels on a clock or on a watch. And so what the communication was, rather than just having circles, it's like the communication becomes the prongs that enable all of these things to work together. And I feel like that was probably the one of the best things that could have happened, is just amalgamizing that information and having those heads of state type forums. And that kind of enabled everything to move quite a bit more smoothly for us.
That's really interesting. And what a smart move to pull all your community leadership together to help the residents just connect with anybody they need to get connected with at one fell swoop. Nina, one of the interesting things that you shared with me earlier, and maybe you can just talk about it, how it fits into the engagement world, is in addition to Bar Harbor just being a beautiful place to be, businesses that were closed over the winter and wanting to open up in the spring clearly were impacted, because that's their money-making time, right? And now all of a sudden COVID has impacted them significantly. How did you deal with your business community and helping them to kind of make it through the summer?
I love that question. I think the biggest thing that we did was we ended up getting some money from the state through the CARES Act, and we developed a mask program. And the mask program did 2 things. Basically, very early on, we were early adopters of masking. And so as soon as July hit and our governor allowed us to open for business, the businesses were ready to go with masks. The Chamber of Commerce and the municipality and the state kind of all worked together, along with the Down East COVID Task Force. And we all came in and we decided this is how we're going to do it. We had asymptomatic testing programs set up at the same time. And so then we were able to open, and we out of, let's see, I think there were something like 2,000 tests performed through our asymptomatic testing program and of hospitality workers. By and large, we came back with not one of our staff members throughout the entire season developed COVID. And we know that it was here, but we were able to be safe about it. And because we had these free mask mailboxes set up all over town, it was something that we could advertise, right? That we were a safe place to come. And then the community also felt really safe, because when they went to the grocery store, they saw that everybody was wearing masks, and they felt safer about being in the place that was their own home. So
That's-
I think that was probably the biggest win of the season for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Way to be creative. It sounds like you accomplished that very successfully.
We did. I had a whole lot of help.
Tell you what, let's go on to the second question. Second question is, how does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And Stephen, if you're okay, let's start with you.
Yeah, certainly. When I answer this question, I'm drawn back to that stat that you threw out about 80% of folks not necessarily having been to a local city council meeting and watching their elected officials work in front of them, and maybe even delegating or asking questions of them on particular matters. I think that the reality is if we have more people coming to those city council meetings, that's obviously a good thing. But I would also challenge a little bit that by the time something's got to the city floor of city council, at least in our context, it's not a fait accompli. It's not done yet, but it's pretty darn close. It's pretty much near the end of a decision pathway, an engagement pathway. There's still an option to get some feedback, but it's on the floor of a council. It's on the floor of a decision-making body, and they're going to make a decision on it, perhaps that evening or that day, and that kind of thing. So I think the way that resident engagement has influenced our success in maintaining a sense of community is we try and use those engagement tools early on in the cycle. So we're contemplating ideas, we're having maybe different models or different potential pathways or options for the community to consider. We're vetting those through the community. We're dialoguing with the community on those different models and options, and then we're presenting those to council and allowing them to see, here's the decision, or here's the commentary that we've received from the community. I go back. I mean, my training is, I'm not an engineer. I'm not an accountant. Municipalities around the world hire a lot of accountants and engineers and planners and the like. I've got an undergraduate degree in political science and a graduate degree in public administration. So I'm very much a generalist, but classic public administration would say that good decisions come from when elected people get advice from professional staff and people in the sort of the bureaucracy or in government, and they meld that professional advice with what they're hearing from the community. And that makes good policy decisions, right? They find a marriage between those two things, and that leads to good policy. Well, that's incredibly important, and it does build community. It builds a sense of community, because if we engage early and we engage often, people can see the fruits of their labor in the decisions that elected people make on behalf of the community. And so I think that's incredibly important. And I think the pandemic has sort of thrust that at us. It's sort of said, you need to do this. You can't just rely on it coming to the floor of council for a decision making and give somebody 5 minutes at a mic and have 10 people show up and have their 5 minutes at the mic to say their piece. It makes that decision making a lot more protracted. Some of those decisions can be much longer. And I think there's an important to be able to scale the amount of engagement. I mean, important decisions that need to be made now often need to be made now. Nina's example of cruise ships, that was probably a decision that needed to be made now. There's probably not a lot of room for engagement on that. But where you put a park structure, what features or amenities are in that park structure, those are all things that we can take time on. And if we take time on it, we do it right. And when we do it right and we take time, I think that builds a sense of community. So
that sounds like something that we advocate all the time, that when you want to engage with your residents, you want to engage from the start to the end. People want to be involved in the design, in the progress, in all of those kind of decision making. But then at the end, they also want to know what you did with that input. And it sounds like that's something that you were just describing. Is that fair?
Yeah, very fair. And I think, there's even a next step that we would want to take. I think, again, and I think you have to, I'll use the word scale. You have to scale the kind of engagement you want to deploy depending on the situation. The easy example is Nina's example with cruise ships. It's like, we know that there's a public health dilemma there. We know there's a public health challenge with them coming. That's an easy and quick decision that should be probably informed most predominantly by, in the case of the US, folks at the CDC, local health authorities, et cetera. But the far end of the spectrum is something that we've contemplated here in Guelph. We haven't yet done. A city in Canada that's pretty progressive in this regard is the city of Victoria, which is on the west coast, sort of Dylan's time zone. It's just outside of Vancouver as the major metropolitan area. It's called the city of Victoria. And they've employed something called citizen assemblies or citizen juries. It's a fascinating concept. It allows a citizen, a community and group to come together and decide on these things. So I think it runs the gamut. I think you're quite right, Matt, that you've got to engage beginning, middle, and end of the sort of decision-making cycle, but it also, you can scale up the level of or level of engagement that happens in each of those components based on the project. I guess what I would come back to is it takes a lot of really deliberative thought to think these things through. It takes effort, it takes energy, and it should be a deliberative process. It should be something where you're deliberately thinking about these things.
Yeah, and that just kind of underscores the importance of doing it now, because everybody's life has been turned upside down. So paying attention to where people's needs and priorities are right now is such a critical thing. So that's very helpful. Nina, in such a destination location like Bar Harbor, how does your engagement play into maintaining that sense of community?
Well, I think it's a funny question. When you sent it, I was like, wow, I could answer this professionally or personally. Right? Because often what feeds me is the same thing that feeds the community, I found. And that's always been my approach to engagement. It's like, okay, what would I want to know? What would make me feel good in this situation? Stephen, a little bit like what you were talking about. How do you make it, how do I become accessible, right? How do we make this as much like the real thing as we can get? And so that's always been my approach to the engagement and to engagement. I think that Polco, I'm going to sound like an advertisement for Polco right now, which isn't my intention. But it's, I'll tell you what it does. So when we started using Polco, we were having trouble. So we have these wonderful projects that begin, right? And you're like, okay, let's build the ferry terminal. We're going to, for example, let's build the ferry terminal. And so you get a whole bunch of energy around building the ferry terminal. And then it goes into this kind of quiet, dormant planning stage. So everybody's come together with the idea. We said, yes, we're going to do this. And then it goes quiet. And then everybody kind of forgets about it, right? And so, and then when it surfaces again, people are like, what? I didn't know this was happening. You know, I didn't know this decision had been made or this decision had been made. And so one of the things that I love about Polco is that it's another tool to remind people that there's still this ongoing conversation, because if it's done well and it's done right, it's going to take a long time. And so we have to make sure that we don't let people forget about it. Like, this project is still happening. And so it's nice, Polco we use as, hey, guess what? This is still happening. What are you thinking about, you know, these decisions that we are considering? And it's just enough that maybe the newspaper will pick it up, or then those little cogs in the wheels will begin to work their little machine over on the right-hand side or over on the left. And it's just enough to maintain that level of conversation, which I think is so vital to making a project fully engaged and good policy, good practice.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nina. And I appreciate the point that you're not intending for it to be a commercial Polco, and that's not what these panels conversations are intended for. But I will say that in Bar Harbor, you have over 15% of your population that are tied together with that technology platform, so that you can really grab onto and inform and keep 15% of your population connected. And that's a unique number and something it's a substantive amount of your community. So that's a great point. Dylan, how about in Monrovia? How has engagement influenced your success in maintaining a sense of community, particularly because you're in such an urban area and regional area?
I think we sometimes, local government officials sometimes mistake, maybe lack of public participation as broad support for an item, right? We don't get participation. We don't have public residents showing up to a council meeting. I mean, how many times have we adopted budgets, $250 million and not a single public comment on it? I mean, we just got through one. And I think sometimes we mistake that either they don't want to participate or they're disinterested because they want to participate. I think it's really more of a challenge for us. And again, how do we engage them in meaningful ways? And for some, it's tools like Polco surveys. For others, it's, town halls and forums. I think for us, one of the things that we spent time on I spent time with the city council is talking about the council goals. What are the key overarching themes, goals? And one of them is relationships. And relationships for us was all about engaging stakeholders in our community. And everything we do, we have to be thinking about new creative ways to engage people who have never been engaged. They're wanting to be invited to participate. And so for us in Monrovia, we have probably 6 to 8 different Facebook groups of 10,000 plus people. Some people are part of all the groups. And so when I want to engage people, I just publish something and encourage some of these administrators of these social media pages to share it. And you'd be surprised how fast that information can get out. People weighing in, and that's a way to communicate that I couldn't do on my own without them. So even during instances, we recently had a major fire right here in Monrovia, the Bobcat fire. It's a big one right here in Southern California. It burned across the entire hillside, a little over 115,000 acres in LA County, largest wildfire in LA County history. It was a significant ordeal, and we really had to change and modify the ways we engage with the public as that fire burned down the hillside right into our backyard and even burned within the city. New, unique, creative ways to engage, to talk, to discuss, to share information, to be able to respond regularly to concerns and questions about what was going on. But I think what I'm most proud of is kind of what we get to look forward to now. We have about an 85-acre park that's been burned. It's beloved by the community, so much so that 20 years ago, the residents voted on a special parcel tax assessment to purchase about 1,500 acres of the mountainside to be for public property in perpetuity. So we have these beautiful hillside properties that the city owns for wildland and open space area. And much of it's burned and inaccessible now. Rocks and debris flow, mudslides this coming winter. So what we're doing is we're trying to engage residents by taking them up to the park in a way that we've never done before. So looking at use of drones and how do we get aerial footage of their favorite walking trails, their favorite sites and locations. We've got time-lapse cameras. We even have some virtual walking cameras to take people up. Here's what the trail looked like before it burned. Here's what it looks like now. We even hired a cadre of photographers to be our on-call photographers. So when we start to see grass seedlings sprouting up, or when we see debris from a recent mudslide, we want to be able to get up there and get pictures and be able to share those with the community. So in ways, we want to take them to the park because they can't get there without us. And so I think it's trying to find, whatever the circumstance, a creative way to engage people where, everybody can watch a cool drone video for 45 seconds, but they might not want to come to a 45-minute long meeting and listen to the city manager go like this about what's going on up there. And so we're trying to think a little differently.
That is great. I have to apologize. You've had COVID, you've had post George Floyd issues, and the fire. you've had a tough summer.
The problem is I started right before all this happened, so my new nickname is the Black Cloud.
Well, it certainly sounds like you've been dealing with it very creatively, for sure. Well, let's go on to our third question. And that is, which tools do you currently use to measure feedback from a resident's perspective during these challenging times? And Nina, I think we're going to start with you on this one.
Well, in terms of measuring, I think it's number of emails, number of phone calls, Polco, which we just recently started using again. We kind of took a small hiatus for a while, just where government had contracted so much and we were focused on COVID. So now we're back to using Polco. And then the numbers of how many people are coming to meetings. That's kind of how we know if we're in the right places. And then we're also putting information out in the newspapers regularly, and we're publishing weekly updates as well. And so we can tell from the numbers of downloads that we are reaching a significant portion of the population.
Does Bar Harbor have a pretty established performance measurement program that incorporates the resident sentiments on, service satisfaction, those kinds of things?
Well, we've used Polco for that. We've done a number of resident satisfaction surveys. We did a police satisfaction survey. How well are our police engaged in the community? Are they doing what you think they should be doing for the money they're receiving? That kind of thing. But do we have a formalized one? No.
Yeah, and has that changed in terms of just as you start getting into COVID recovery, how you're tracking that process?
Well, yeah, that's a really great question. The chamber does some of that work. And the state has been doing some of that work. They have a special team designated just to recovery. And I have been pushing council to form a recovery task force, but they are leaving it in the hands of our Chamber of Commerce.
Okay. Dylan, how about you? What tools are you using in Monrovia?
We have some software and formatting tools that we use to measure our different communications. We use them for communication. So for example, every week I have a city manager update. It's a subscription-based app, and I'm able to push out information on a weekly basis. That's changed, during COVID. Early on, it was a daily city manager update. During the Bobcat fire, I did 3 updates a day. Making sure that people were getting a formal update from the city, as well as our approach on social media. So we use these different tools and we track subscriptions. When I first began a little over a year ago, we had about 800 subscribers in a town of 40,000, and they tended to be long, kind of updates on here's everything going on in the city. And as I would get these regular emails in about what I felt people were asking about, what was important to them, we started narrowing down the length of those updates to try and tailor them to what people wanted to know. And over the course of the last year, we've seen our city manager update subscriptions go. They've more than doubled in subscriptions. Nixle is our emergency communications tool. Same thing. We don't abuse Nixle. We've used Nixle for announcing there's an evacuation warning in place, announcing there's still an evacuation warning in place. At one time during a wildfire fight, we needed to tell residents to conserve water. And so, we issued a Nixle alert to tell every resident to turn off your water and preserve it because there's a huge firefight on the hill going on. This is your way to fight the fire. And I'll be darned, we had residents literally stop taking showers and walking around proud that they hadn't taken a shower in 3 days. And it was a great way for people to communicate and share stories. But Nixle subscriptions went from 3,000 up to 18,000 in just a couple weeks' time. And then lastly, the one that I was most excited about was, again, during the fire, which happened in September 6th through the 19th. We use our city website for major communications to the public. And in 2019, our unique visitors to the website totaled 800,000 unique visitors. But during 1 week of that fire, we had 700,000 unique visitors to our website. So what we tried to do is we tried to make the website, very user-friendly, only the most pertinent information that they need to know. And we always use direct source, direct information. So we don't recreate the information. If you want to know what the CDC says about, COVID-19 guidelines, here's a link to it. And we would send people there and get them connected to the information they were seeking as quickly as we could. And I think that's how we tried to shape our engagement practices moving forward.
That's very impressive. I picked up a couple of things on that, just the increase in the amount of attention on virtual connections. But the other thing that's ringing through to me with Monrovia is just kind of the multifaceted approach that you've taken to your overall engagement. That's very impressive. Stephen, what tools are you using up in Guelph, or just for measuring resident feedback? But are there any kind of common approaches or common tools that are being used?
Yeah, we predominantly, as it relates to specific engagements that we have with the community members on specific topics, we use a platform on our website at haveyoursay.guelph.ca. So haveyoursay.guelph.ca, and that's sort of an online engagement platform that we use for specific engagement tasks or specific projects that we want to engage on. You mentioned a citizen satisfaction survey. We do that about every couple of years. And so that helps us give us baseline sort of metrics on what people are finding or their level of satisfaction with various city services. But then it goes to a lot of what Nina and Dylan have already mentioned. We're looking at social media reach for different things. We're looking at web statistics on guelph.ca. We have a lot of conversations with community groups, neighborhood groups. And I would say an interesting piece is, we've looked at this sort of informal community group gatherings that have popped up in a virtual way. They were in person previous to COVID, and now they've gone virtual. And we try and leverage those as opportunities to to measure feedback, to go and talk to these folks and have sort of more of a dialogue based measurement of the feedback, as opposed to sort of really hard and fast quantitative. Sometimes that sort of qualitative dialogue style measurement of feedback by actually engaging with those groups is a really good way to measure that kind of feedback we're getting from residents. And then linking back to something I just said about web statistics, but we have an open data portal as well on the city's website. And so we have various data sets that the community that are constantly updated, that the community can download. We've got a lot of really good folks that are tech inclined, much more than I am. I'm the Luddite when it comes to that stuff, but they're tech savvy, and they're taking those data sets and doing pretty unique things with it. And so that's really really valuable as well. And I think so that's another measure of success too, is how many people are downloading those types of tools and data sets, and how many people are using them, and then what tools are they turning out, almost quite frankly on our behalf, free of charge kind of thing, which is really really interesting. So I would say that's sort of a quick and dirty summary of where we're at.
Yeah, it's really been impressive from all of you, just on number one, the level of priority that you have placed in community engagement and the importance that plays in kind of your overall operations, as well as just kind of the creative and multifaceted ways that all of you are engaging your community. So I don't think I could have asked for a better panel today. So thanks for all of your thoughts. I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to ask each other any questions, if anything comes to mind, while we just kind of see if there's any other questions that are here. Anybody have anything of others? Go ahead, Nina.
I do. I've got one for Dylan. Dylan, you were talking about putting information out onto the different social media groups and then monitoring those. Who monitors those? That seems like that would be just such an exhaustive amount of time to put into conversations happening in groups outside of municipal government. And I'm just wondering, do you have someone dedicated to doing that? And how often do you use that as a tool?
So myself, I have a communications analyst, which is part of the city manager's office here, who works very closely. So I do have a staff person committed to this. We don't monitor in the sense of like government monitoring the public comment, right? But what's really good is to have a pulse on what the community is saying, because right now they're not, in COVID times, they're not out talking in the restaurants, they're not talking in the grocery stores, they're talking online. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a pulse of what the community is saying. So myself, I'm a member of all these different Facebook pages. Frequently people will tag me at all hours of the night and expect a response from the manager. So I respond as early as I can. I have staff that do it as well. But really the way that we try to go about it is, I have cell phone contacts from all the administrators of the pages. That way, when we get ready to have important information going out, like during COVID closures, I was actually reaching out personally via text saying, hey, just letting you know this is coming. Could you help us push it? And they would. And we didn't really have to monitor in a sense of know what's going on. We're cognizant of Open Records Act request and not wanting to create this long paper trail. And in fact, most times the city of Monrovia is not actually engaging in the dialogue. We're letting the residents engage, develop their opinions amongst themselves, and then let us know what they think. So that's kind of the approach we take with social media.
And then how do you weight that? Because I feel like there's a particular conversation that happens in Facebook, and then there's the reality, right? So people get really excited over there. So I'm just wondering, do you have a method of weighting that?
I don't. I'm sure there's going to be some unique ways to try and weight that, but it's in a way I look at it similar to that one person coming to council meetings saying, what this town needs is outdoor chicken keeping. And then that becomes like the most important priority. That becomes the topic of discussion in the local paper. Like now the whole city is crazy about chickens, right? Or whatever the issue is. So for me, I take this social media commentary as just anecdotal to whatever the council decision-making process is. I encourage people to weigh in. Here's the email. Let your council members know what you think. We make sure public comments, everyone knows the link directly to public comments. So in COVID, when they can't physically come, send an email here, we'll get you down. We're able to include their comments as part of the record, but there's really at this point, it's nothing more than just trying to extract as much anecdotal information as we can about residents' want.
That's great. Thank you.
Can I make a quick comment about Stephen and virtual office hours? That's awesome. I'm gonna copy that, and you deserve a royalty, my friend. That's I think what's just really cool that I would share is I love having conversations with people who are just creative, whether it's using tools and how you engage 15% of your community. If I could engage 15%, tell me what the tool is I'm in. But likewise, virtual office hours, in a town like ours where people want to pick up the phone and get a hold of the manager, again, just creative ideas, creative solutions. I think it's great.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, I've heard creativity throughout this entire conversations. So congratulations on all that. A couple of things that I picked up on is during this COVID thing, or this COVID experience that we're all living through, there's an increased amount of participation because people are now able to access technology. I think in large part too, they also are, and this is also being proven out in the research that we've done, is that where historically people really took for granted a lot of the services that they get from local government, they now rely on local governments. And so there's an increased appreciation for the important role that local government plays in just kind of building that overall quality of life. And throughout all of your comments, I think that you've all taken the time to figure out those creative ways to kind of capture what is already an existing appreciation and desire to be part of the community through all of your virtual activities, all of your outreach. I love the virtual birthday party because that just is one of those simple things that allows people to be connected. And all of you are using a whole variety of tools. I mean, engagement historically has always been a multifaceted tool, and COVID has required us to kind of incorporate technology in helping to make sure that engagement happens. And so it's really impressive to hear about all the tools that you are using to engage people and maintain that overall sense of community. The other thing that I'll just point out, and this is really directed to you, Stephen, is that so much of what happens at the local level is international, right? It's a universal thing. It's about people living in a community and in a surrounding, whether it's at a municipal level or if it's just simply in your neighborhood. You want to be connected, and that's such an important part of people's lives. So let me just thank all of you for participating today in this panel. We're going to be, the follow-up steps now from this are really the following. I'll be following up with, I'll send you information on contact information for each of you so that you can continue the conversation. And Dylan, you and Stephen can learn more about the virtual hours, which I also agree is a very creative approach. And just wanted to let you know that we're doing these panels every week. Next week, we're going to be hearing from the communities of Banning, California, Dayton, Texas, and Jacksonville, Florida. And we'll be starting to build a more and more a greater level of audience participations in the process. I'll send you an email with a recording of all of the conversation today. And we'd really encourage you to take that and share that. The whole intent behind this effort is really to share it with other local government officials so that they can benefit from all of your perspectives. And then lastly, I'll connect with you just to get any feedback that you have on how we can do these things better. It's all about helping local governments do a better job, especially in this challenging time. And I just want to really thank all of you for participating today. And it's been great to get to know you. I've known you a little while, Nina, but I just always find it really rewarding to hear people's perspectives, and because I know it's going to benefit all of us as we hear that story. So thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having us. Take care, Matt. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Matt. Bye, Dylan. Bye, Stephen.
Take care, everybody. Nice meeting you all. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan.